If you're ready to spend the next hour in hospital corridors where death doesn't mean rest, welcome to Story Place. Get comfortable and don't forget to subscribe because ahead of us lies a story that will change your perception of what happens in hospitals after midnight. The call came at 6:47 p.m. on a Tuesday evening in November. I was sitting in my studio apartment, eating microwaved pasta and reviewing medical journals, when my phone buzzed with an unknown number. "Dr. Marcus Webb," the voice said. "Emergency replacement needed at Mercy General Hospital. Night shift. Internal medicine ward. Could I be there by 8 p.m.? I should have asked more questions. I should have wondered why they needed a substitute so urgently, why they couldn't find someone from their regular staff, why the voice on the phone sounded so strained and hurried. But I was 3 months behind on rent, my medical license was gathering dust, and desperation makes you ignore red flags that should be blazing sirens. My name is Dr. Sarah Chen, and I'd been working as a substitute physician for 8 months, filling in at different hospitals across the county when their regular staff called in sick or went on vacation. It wasn't glamorous work, mostly flu cases, minor injuries, routine checkups, but it paid the bills and kept my skills sharp while I waited for a permanent position to open up. Mercy General Hospital sat on the outskirts of town like a concrete monument to suffering. Built in the 1960s, it had that institutional grimness that made even healthy people feel sick just looking at it. Gray concrete walls, small windows that never seemed to let in enough light, and a parking lot full of potholes that looked like open wounds in the asphalt. I arrived at 7:55 p.m., 5 minutes early, as always. The main entrance was locked, which struck me as odd for a hospital, but I found a side entrance marked Staff Only that opened when I swiped the temporary key card they'd given me over the phone. The lobby was empty, except for a security guard who barely looked up from his newspaper as I walked past. The elevator took me to the 4th floor, where the internal medicine ward was supposed to be located. The hallway stretched out before me like something from a nightmare. Fluorescent lights flickering intermittently, casting moving shadows on the linoleum floor. Half the bulbs were burned out, creating patches of darkness between pools of sickly yellow light. Room 401 was my first stop. Mrs. Eleanor Patterson, age 73, admitted for pneumonia. I knocked softly and entered, expecting to find an elderly woman resting in bed. Instead, I found someone who looked like she'd been there for months. Mrs. Patterson was unconscious, connected to machines that beeped and hummed in the darkness. Her skin was gray, almost translucent, and her breathing was so shallow I had to lean close to confirm she was alive. The smell hit me immediately. Not the usual hospital mixture of disinfectant and medicine, but something else, something sweet and cloying that made my stomach turn. I checked her chart. Admitted November 15th for bacterial pneumonia. Today was December 18th. She'd been here for over a month, which seemed excessive for a standard pneumonia case. But her vital signs were stable, if weak, and her medication schedule was being followed according to the notes. Room 402 contained Mr. James Rodriguez, 45, admitted for chest pain.
He was awake when I entered, staring at the ceiling with wide, unblinking eyes. His skin had the same gray pallor as Mrs. Patterson, and when I spoke to him, he didn't respond. He didn't even acknowledge my presence, just continued staring upward as if seeing something I couldn't.
I waved my hand in front of his face. Nothing. I checked his pupils with my penlight. They were fixed and dilated, not responding to the light at all. But according to his chart, he was responsive and conversational during the day shift. The notes indicated he'd been asking about his family, worried about missing work, acting like a normal patient concerned about his condition. Room 403 was even worse. Mrs. Angela Foster, 38, admitted for severe migraines. She was sitting up in bed, perfectly still, her hands folded in her lap. Her eyes were open, but completely white. Not blind, but as if her pupils had simply disappeared. When I called her name, she turned her head toward me with mechanical precision, but her expression never changed. I reached for her wrist to check her pulse, and her skin was ice cold. Not cool from poor circulation, but genuinely cold, like touching a corpse. Yet the heart monitor showed a steady rhythm, and her breathing was regular. The chart indicated she'd been admitted 3 weeks ago, but was showing significant improvement and might be discharged soon. The day shift notes described a woman who was alert, talkative, and eager to return home to her 2 young children. I backed out of the room and stood in the hallway, trying to process what I was seeing. 3 patients, all of them exhibiting symptoms that made no medical sense. Gray skin, cold to the touch, unresponsive or bizarrely responsive, but all supposedly stable and improving according to their charts. Room 404 was empty, but the bed was unmade and there were personal belongings on the nightstand. Reading glasses, a water bottle, family photos. The heart chart holder outside the door was empty, giving me no information about who had been staying there. Room 405 contained Mr. David Kim, 29, admitted for kidney stones. He was standing at the window when I entered, perfectly motionless, looking out at the parking lot 4 stories below. I called his name several times before he slowly turned to face me. His mouth was moving, but no sound was coming out. His lips formed words over and over again, the same silent message repeated endlessly. I moved closer, trying to read his lips, and finally understood what he was trying to say. Help me, help me, help me. But when I checked his throat, there was nothing wrong with his vocal cords. No swelling, no obstruction, no medical reason why he couldn't speak. And according to his chart, he'd been chatting with nurses all day, complaining about the food and asking when he could go home. The pattern continued through every room on the ward. 23 patients total, all of them exhibiting impossible symptoms during the night shift, while their charts indicated completely normal behavior during the day. Patients who should have been discharged weeks ago, but were still here. Patients whose conditions made no medical sense. And then I found the nurses' station. It should have been occupied. There should have been at least 2 nurses on duty for a ward this size. Instead, I found empty chairs, cold coffee cups, and a computer terminal that was still logged in. The screen showed patient schedules, medication times, all the normal administrative details of running a hospital ward. But the timestamps were wrong. According to the computer,
It was November 15th, the same date Mrs. Patterson had been admitted, the same date that appeared on all the charts as the admission date for every patient on the ward. I scrolled through the system looking for some explanation, some technical glitch that could account for the date error. Instead, I found something that made my blood freeze.
Death certificates. Every patient on the ward had a death certificate in the system, all dated November 15th. Mrs. Eleanor Patterson died of pneumonia complications at 11:47 p.m. Mr. James Rodriguez, cardiac arrest at 2:33 a.m. Mrs. Angela Foster, brain aneurysm at 4:15 a.m. 23 death certificates, all from the same night, all filed and processed according to hospital protocol. But those same 23 patients were in their rooms right now, breathing, moving, existing in some impossible state between life and death. I printed out the death certificates with shaking hands, comparing them to the current charts. Same names, same admission dates, same medical conditions, but the people in the rooms upstairs were somehow still here, trapped in a ward that should have been empty for over a month. My phone had no signal. Not unusual in a hospital, with all the concrete and medical equipment interfering with cellular towers. I tried the landline at the nurse's station, but the line was dead. No dial tone, no static, just silence. I was alone in a hospital ward full of dead patients with no way to call for help and no understanding of what was happening. The logical part of my mind tried to find rational explanations. A mass hallucination caused by toxic mold in the building, a gas leak affecting my perception, some kind of elaborate prank or training exercise. But the evidence was too consistent, too detailed, too impossible to dismiss. I decided to examine one of the patients more thoroughly, to document what I was seeing with medical precision. Mrs. Patterson seemed the least disturbing of the group, so I returned to room 401 with a stethoscope and blood pressure cuff. Her pulse was barely detectable, maybe 20 beats per minute. Her blood pressure was so low it barely registered. Her body temperature was 84 degrees Fahrenheit, well below the threshold for survival. By every medical standard I knew, she should have been dead hours ago. But she was breathing, shallow, irregular breaths that came maybe 4 times per minute, but definitely breathing. And when I lifted her eyelid to check her pupil response, she looked directly at me. Her lips moved, forming words I couldn't hear. I leaned closer, and her voice came out as the faintest whisper. "Doctor, help us." I jerked back, knocking over the IV stand. The crash echoed through the empty hallway, but Mrs. Patterson just continued staring at me with desperate, pleading eyes. "What happened here?" I whispered back. "What happened on November 15th? "Fire," she breathed. "Couldn't get out." Fire. I looked around the room, noticing details I'd missed before. Slight discoloration on the walls near the ceiling, a faint smell of smoke that I'd attributed to old building odors, scorch marks around the light fixtures. The fire was over a month ago. She nodded slowly, the movement taking enormous effort. "But you're still here. You're all still here. Trapped." Her voice was getting weaker. "Can't leave." I backed out of the room and ran down the hallway looking for signs of fire damage. It was there once I knew what to look for: repairs that hadn't been completed, new sections of drywall that didn't quite match the original construction, the lingering smell of smoke and burned plastic. The pieces were falling into place, creating a picture too horrific to fully accept. On November 15th, there had been a fire on the 4th floor of Mercy General Hospital. 23 patients had been trapped in their rooms, unable to evacuate due to their medical conditions or the speed of the fire. They had all died that night, suffocated by smoke or burned alive in their beds. But somehow, they were still here. Still going through the motions of being patients, still hoping for treatment, still believing they might recover and go home to their families. And I was their doctor. I spent the next hour moving from room to room, checking on each patient, trying to understand the rules of whatever impossible situation I had found myself in. Some could speak in whispers, others could only move their eyes or mouths. All of them seemed aware of their condition, trapped between life and death, unable to move on. Mr. Rodriguez grabbed my wrist when I checked his pulse, his grip surprisingly strong for someone whose body temperature was below 80 degrees. "Doctor," he wheezed. "My wife, kids, do they know?" I didn't know how to answer. Did his family know he was dead? Had they attended his funeral? Were they mourning him while he remained trapped in this hospital room, unaware that over a month had passed? "They love you," I said finally. "They miss you." He nodded and released my wrist, seeming to find some peace in my words. Mrs. Foster, the woman with the white eyes, was the most disturbing. When I entered her room, she was standing by the window, perfectly still. She turned when I approached, and I realized her eyes weren't white. They were filled with smoke, thick, gray smoke that swirled behind her corneas like fog. "I can't see my children," she said in a voice like rustling leaves. "The smoke is too thick. Are they safe? Did they get out?" Her children hadn't been in the hospital during the fire. I was certain of that. But in her confused, traumatized state, she seemed to believe they'd been there, that she'd failed to protect them. "They're safe," I told her. "They got out. They're with family." The smoke in her eyes seemed to clear slightly, and for a moment I could see her normal brown irises underneath. "Thank you, doctor. I was so worried." Each patient had their own concerns, their own unfinished business keeping them tethered to this place. Mr. Kim, the kidney stone patient, was worried about a presentation he was supposed to give at work. Mrs. Thompson, in room 408, kept asking about her cat, wondering who was feeding it. Mr. Park, in room 412, wanted to know if his insurance would cover his extended stay. They were all trapped by the mundane concerns of living people, unable to comprehend that those concerns no longer mattered. As the night wore on, I found myself falling into the role they expected me to play. I checked their vitals, even though they barely had any.
I updated their charts, documenting impossible readings. I adjusted their medications, knowing the IV bags contained nothing but saline that their bodies couldn't process.
But it seemed to help them. My presence, my medical attention, gave them a sense of normalcy in their impossible situation. For brief moments, they seemed almost alive again. Around 3 a.m., I discovered I wasn't the only substitute who'd been called in. Dr. Michael Torres was in the break room, sitting at a table with his head in his hands. He looked up when I entered, and I could see the same confusion and terror in his eyes that I felt. "How long have you been here?" I asked. "This is my third night. They called me in Friday. Same story, emergency replacement, night shift only. I keep thinking it's some kind of training exercise, but you've seen the patients." He nodded. "I've been trying to treat them like they're alive, taking blood samples that come back empty, prescribing medications that disappear from their systems. It's impossible, but they seem to respond to medical care." "Did you find the death certificates?" "Second night. I've been trying to understand what happened. Near as I can tell, there was an electrical fire that started in the basement around 10 p.m. on November 15th, spread through the ventilation system to the upper floors. This ward was evacuated last because the patients were too sick to move easily."
He pulled out a folder full of printouts, news articles, fire department reports, hospital incident reports. 23 patients died of smoke inhalation. The fire department said they responded as quickly as possible, but the smoke spread too fast. Most of the patients were unconscious before they could be reached. I sat down across from him, my legs suddenly weak. "So we're treating dead people?" I think they don't know they're dead, or they can't accept it. They're still here because they believe they're still patients, still recovering, still hoping to go home. And we're enabling that? Maybe, or maybe we're helping them process what happened, helping them find peace. I've noticed some changes over the past 3 nights. Mrs. Patterson seems calmer. Mr. Rodriguez has stopped asking about his family. It's like our presence is helping them work through their trauma. The idea was both comforting and terrifying. Were we helping these souls find rest, or were we trapping them further by playing along with their delusion? "How many other doctors have been called in?" I asked. "I don't know. The hospital administration seems to know what's happening, but they don't talk about it directly. They just keep calling in substitutes for the night shift, people who won't ask too many questions." "What happens during the day shift?" "That's the strangest part. I came back during day hours once just to see. The ward is empty. Completely empty. All the beds are made, all the equipment is turned off. It's like they're only here at night." We sat in silence for a while, processing the impossible situation we'd found ourselves in. 2 medical professionals, trained to save lives, now serving as caretakers for the dead.
"What do we do?" I asked finally. "I think we keep doing what we're doing. We treat them with dignity, we listen to their concerns, and we help them feel cared for. Maybe eventually they'll be ready to let go." The rest of the night passed quietly. I made my rounds, checking on each patient, offering what comfort I could. Some were more responsive than others, but all of them seemed grateful for the attention. As dawn approached, I noticed changes in the patients. Their breathing became even shallower, their responses slower.
It was as if the approaching daylight was calling them back to whatever realm they inhabited during the day. Mrs. Patterson was the last to fade. As the first rays of sunlight crept through her window, she looked at me with eyes that seemed clearer than they'd been all night. "Doctor," she whispered, "thank you for taking care of us. We were so afraid we'd been forgotten." "You haven't been forgotten. You're all remembered. Your families love you." She smiled. The first genuine smile I'd seen from any of the patients, and closed her eyes. Her breathing stopped, but peacefully this time, as if she was finally able to rest. By 7 a.m., the ward was empty. All the patients had faded away, leaving behind clean, empty rooms that showed no sign of the night's impossible events. The charts I'd updated were blank. The medications I administered were back in their original containers. I left the hospital as the day shift arrived, walking past nurses and doctors who had no idea what happened in their building after dark. To them, the fourth floor was just another ward, temporarily closed for renovations after the November fire. But I knew I'd be back. The hospital would call again, needing a substitute for the night shift, and I would answer. Because 23 people had died in fear and confusion, and they deserved to have someone care for them while they worked through their trauma.
Dr. Torres was right. We weren't just treating patients, we were helping souls find peace. It wasn't the kind of medicine they taught in medical school, but it was medicine nonetheless. 3 months later, I'm still taking night shifts at Mercy General. The number of patients has decreased gradually. Mrs. Patterson moved on after my second night, Mr. Rodriguez after my fifth. Mrs. Foster took longer, needing several conversations about her children before she could let go of her worry. Some nights, new patients appear, people who died in the hospital on other nights, other tragedies. A car accident victim who doesn't understand why his family isn't visiting. An elderly man who had a heart attack in the emergency room and keeps asking when the test results will come back. Each one needs something different. Some need medical care, the familiar routine of being a patient. Others need someone to listen to their fears, to validate their concerns, to help them understand what happened to them. And sometimes they need permission to let go. I've learned to recognize the signs, the way their breathing changes when they're ready to move on, the clarity that comes to their eyes when they finally understand their situation, the peace that settles over their features when they realize it's okay to stop fighting, okay to rest. The hospital administration never acknowledges what happens on the night shift. They just keep calling substitute doctors, people who are desperate enough or open-minded enough to accept an impossible job. We're a rotating staff of the living, caring for the dead, helping them transition from one state to another. It's not the medical career I planned, but it's meaningful work. More meaningful perhaps than anything I could do for the living. The living have hope, have futures, have time to heal. The dead only have us. A few hours each night when they can remember what it felt like to be cared for, to be treated with dignity, to be seen as more than just another tragedy. Some nights the ward is completely empty. Those are the hardest nights, because it means everyone has moved on, but it also means my job is working. Slowly, patient by patient, we're helping lost souls find their way home. The November fire was a tragedy that took 23 lives in a single night. But the real tragedy would be leaving those souls trapped forever, forgotten and afraid,
reliving their final moments without hope of peace. So I keep taking the night shifts. I keep answering the calls. I keep showing up with my stethoscope and my clipboard and my willingness to treat the impossible. Because everyone deserves a doctor when they're scared and confused, even the dead, especially the dead. And in the quiet hours before dawn, when the last patient has faded away and the ward returns to its daytime emptiness, I know I'm making a difference. Not in the way I expected when I became a doctor, but in the way that matters most. I'm helping people find peace, even if they're already gone. If this story made you see hospitals and death in a new light, hit that like button and subscribe to Story Place. Every day there's a new horror story here, and trust me, Dr. Chen wasn't the only one who faced the impossible. Write in the comments, would you take a night shift at such a hospital? See you in the next nightmare.